São Paulo yellow or Isle of Man green, right? Even in the color names, BMW makes it very clear what the DNA of the M family coupes is. The M2 São Paulo yellow, of course, is because of Interlagos, right, guys? And Isle of Man green, right? Because of the Isle of Man. But the news coming from Brejo de Cruz, no, that's not the news. The real news is that the M4 competition is in Brazil. So get your checkbook ready, or Pete. 908,000. Check it out. What a beautiful detail on this LED tail light. While the M2, which arrived, remember? I remember 600 and raw. 617,000 is already around 686. Let's call it 700, right? There's a difference of 200,000. 200,000 between these two guys. And then obviously the question comes up, right? Is it worth it for you to pay RP 200,000 more to get the upgrade to the competition version? That's what we came here for. Until Cardem Campos do Jordão finds out, discovers, and confirms. Well, first, what are you getting extra for those 200,000 more? You're getting a bigger car, right? Here we're talking about the G platform. G82, this car is 4.8 meters long. Yes, it's the length of a Commander. Here we're talking about the G87 platform with 4.5 meters. So if you're like me, a happy guy in his 40s and a family man, maybe your thing is the M4. Because look, the car isn't on, but I'll be able to show you. Yes, it fits. An adult fits back here, right? On a not so long trip, right? Yes, a baby seat fits here easily, right? Because you have this space, right? It emphasizes the dashboard and steering wheel because there are a lot of similarities between these siblings, as you're going to see now, right? Actually, when I say G82, G87, we're talking about the same platform, right? The G platform. There's a bit of confusion because, look, as you can see here, the steering wheel is exactly the same. The dashboard, the BMW display here, also exactly the same. There's a bit of confusion because here in Brazil, we've had the M235 for a few years now, right? It had front-wheel drive. The platform was derived from the Mini and so on, or related, not derived, right? Shared would be the correct word. Here, the situation is already a bit more complicated, right? Here we're talking about you can leave your hotel and come to Cardia and Campos, but you can't come to Campos itself. In the M4, you can. Here, let me take off my backpack so you can see. Yeah, the space in the back seat is much smaller, right? You could say that the M2 is a 2+2 car, right? And the M4 is a genuine four-seater. But what about under the hood in terms of performance? Let's go. Take a look at this sunroof here. Take a look at the carbon roof here. The competition treatment reduces weight in several ways, right? Suspension parts and everything else. The weight difference between these cars is small, about 20 kilo. And then the fact that the M4 has 30 more horsepower and 5 kilos of extra torque. There are 510 here. This interior looks nice, of course, right? I'll return the seat to its original position. This one has 510 horsepower and 66 kilo of torque compared to 480 and 61 over there. So, the bigger car is heavier. Yeah, right? Whoa, because we're comparing a competition with a non-competition. So the acceleration numbers here in the 4-second range are slightly better than the 4.2 over there. But all of this, you don't need to be watching my video here to know about the experience. You just need to read a spec sheet, right? We drove and felt the sensory difference between these two cars. They have very different purposes. Yes, here we have more of a Grand Tourer experience, right? Even though the M4 is BMW's main production-based race car today, right? It's the car used in GT3 at Le Mans by Augusto Farfus and so on. We even have the M2 Cup, right? It arrived here in Brazil. But the M2 is a homologation car for the GT4 category, which targets gentleman drivers, right? Even though, let's say, the racing pedigree of the M4 is greater, the fact is I doubt we'll see M4S at track days here in Brazil. Sure, there might be one or another, but it's not the car for that. The car for that is the M2. In fact, even more than that, right? It's the M2 CS. And I never get tired of saying how this generation of the M2 is such an interesting track car. There's a video of the M2 on the channel, us drifting with it. It's a very easy car to drift. The little red M2 over there at RS2UD in the special segment Super Machinas that we did right in the year this car was launched. This one is what we can call a driver's car. This one is more of a Grand Tour. It's that car for you. Yeah, I think the best way for me to define it is, this is the car for you to come to Campos, right? And this one is the car for you to get to the Serra de Campos Road and maybe go to the Mantiqueira Speedway. Really enjoy a car that's very edgy, very lively on track. Yeah, not that the M4 isn't, right? One of the perks of being an automotive journalist is that you get to jump from one to the other. Look, the extra 200 grand you pay there gets you an electric trunk and features. Here, you have to use your arm. What a sacrifice. But there's no doubt that the personality of the cars is quite different in that sense. Obviously, if you drive the M4 by itself without making a direct comparison, it will definitely feel like a very responsive car, and it is very lively in your hands. But the M2 is really in a class of its own in that sense. Both cars have very direct steering. It's very quick. The BMW's steering ratio is very quick to the point where I'll put an asterisk here, a disclaimer. This is a car for those with a bit more experience. It's a car where the quickness of the steering, even at high speeds, can scare those who aren't used to it, especially in the M2. These are cars for the more experienced, but thank God, right? We're in that group. After many years on the track and in motorsport, my heart ends up leaning a little more toward the M2. But the coolest part is that we can make this direct comparison today. So let's do the following. Let's go up the mountain with the M4 and then take the highway with the M2 so you can feel the difference and choose for yourselves. Get in, not on the roof, right? Get in the M4, get in through the window of the M4, and let's hit the gas. And now comes the moment of truth. I'm starting this little GoPro in the gas station parking lot. You know why? Because to put it in track mode, the car has to be completely still. So it's in track mode that we'll go up the mountain here in Campos and give you our driving impressions of the M4 competition. Let's go. All right, time to channel Augusto Farfus inside you. The speed camera is up ahead. Thank you, Google Maps. On Android, right? Let's test the brakes of the competition version right here. Wow, that was a good squeeze on the brakes. Plenty, right? To catch the 60 limit speed camera here. And then, what else are we testing? Acceleration power. Even a little loss of traction, right? There's a lot of torque. It's 66 kilos of torque, 510 horsepower, right? On paper, those numbers aren't that much more impressive than the M2, right? Which has 480 and 61. A little less than 10 difference, right? Yeah, but don't forget about the magic of the competition treatment, right? Because you guys are, for example, here and not on the solar roof, because there isn't a solar roof, there's a carbon roof, right? The car has several weight reduction measures. So this M4, which is built on the G82 platform from the 3 Series from the X3, right? This platform has to do more work, let's say, than the G87 platform, which is exclusive to the M2. The M2 is a car that was born to be a pure sports car, let's say, speed. And look how interesting. On this G82 here, look, I'll put it to the side. Here. Rear view mirror for what, right? Nobody looks. You have to, here, little chain. Yeah, catch the engine sound in the tunnel here. A little bit of pops and bangs. Yeah. We just passed the Commander over there. This thing is as long as a Commander. It's funny. Commander, right? 4.80. It's a very long car. It's a German Mustang, right? But in this competition version, it has the same weight as the M2, which, let's admit, isn't exactly an extremely light car for its size. But the competition treatment and the fact that they're different platforms makes the M4, which is much bigger, right? About 20 or 30 centimeters longer than the M2, have the same weight. And so, yes, it's a very lively car, right? in your hands. I joked, right, about you being Augusto Farfus. Can't you see me, biker? Can't you see me? Can't you see me? Stay on the left. So we pass on the right. Yeah, because the M4 is the homologation car for BMW in GT3 competitions around the world, including in Germany. And the M4 actually, and the M2, which now even has its own category in Brazil. The M2, which is the homologation car for BMW in GT4 competitions. Which means, what the Creta just did is another thing that fascinates me, right? The guy is seeing the truck, but he only decides to do something about the truck, which is slower than him when he's already right on top of the truck. Obviously, at that point, he doesn't even check the rearview mirror to see if someone is coming. But what can I say? When you look at the specs and see it from the outside, you don't expect the M4 to be such an agile car, but now, yes, it is. You saw there on that uneven surface, right, on those bumps, that's when you do feel the weight a little, right? But other than that, when you're on that German asphalt, which isn't so easy to find in Brazil, it's the kind of car that feels like it gets smaller as you speed up, right? I used to say that a lot about the Mustang Dark Horse before the previous generation of the Mustang Mach-1, and I think it's a really interesting comparison in terms of temperament, right? In terms of dimensions and temperament between the Mustang Dark Horse and this M4 competition. What are the main differences? Well, here you have better fit and finish, a higher level of refinement, right? European school, the Mustang is a car built on a cheaper platform, right? It needs to have a lower price in the United States. Yeah, but where does that show? In the price, right? We're talking about a 900 grand car here. That's 250 grand more than the Mach-1. You can buy the Dark Horse, right? And still have a Ranger V6 XLS from Ford as the family car, right? So the price difference is big, even within BMW itself, where the M2 actually competes in price with the Mustang, right? It's also a car in the 650,000 range. Leaving the price aside, right? There are always two ways to evaluate a car, right? You can evaluate it on its own, right? Individually, and then evaluating this car individually, you feel the competition treatment here, right? Yeah, the suspension responds quickly. The car and the steering, obviously, are very agile, like every BMW M. So, wow, put someone in this car, it's a real Swiss Army knife, right? Because it's a grand tourer for you to take the Carvalho Pinto on the way to Campos here, keep a high average speed, Autobahn style, with all the comfort, with the Harman Kardon sound system, with the full leather interior, etc., etc. And then, when the mountain road starts to climb here, it goes through a metamorphosis, a transformation, and becomes something closer to an M2. And I emphasize this closer because when you leave the universe where you're evaluating the M4 in isolation and you put it the M4 competition, right? At this price, in a market where the M2 costs 650, the Dark Horse costs 650, yeah, then you start doing the math, right? When it comes to value for money, and you notice a few little things, right? For example, the driving position here, I have the seat almost at the lowest setting. Even so, I still feel high up in the car. Why is that? Because this H-point here, this platform, like I said, it has to meet the needs of both the 320i customer and the X3, right? So it needs to be a bit more of a Swiss Army knife, right? Jack of all trades, as they say in English. While the M2 is really a purebred platform, purpose-built to be a car with a consistently sporty temperament in any of its applications. And all of its applications are in the 2 Series, this rear-wheel drive 2 Series, right? Out there's the 240i, there are other M240i models. There's even a 225, if I'm not mistaken, a 228, right? Which is a more basic version that's available in the European market, the American market, but it's always a 2-door car, low, rear-wheel drive, etc., etc. The M4 ends up needing a more versatile platform, so it becomes a bit of a big car, right? For a big sporty coupe. It ends up being more of a grand tourer than a sports car. Even the sound here, I think the M2, right? Even though it has the same engine, the way it's tuned, we know BMW artificially pipes the sound into the cabin, right? I think even the way they handle this electronic sound in the M2 is more aggressive. Yeah, but besides that, what a great car, right? As your only car, if you're a successful single guy or part of a young couple, it's really quite captivating. But if you're like me, crazy about sportiness, the M4 competition has a rival in its own lineup. Let's jump to it. Power! Are on the M2. G87 with the S58 engine, because BMW diehards needs that, right? It needs those little codes. Yeah, but there's no doubt, right? Even though we're here in a car that weighs 1,700 kilos and is over 4.5 meters long, right? It's surreal to imagine that an M2 has reached this size. But there's no doubt that as soon as you sit in the M2, you feel like you're in a more agile, more lively car, right? Especially lighter, more compact than the M4 itself. Let's play with the modes here. Will it let us enter track mode? Activate track. I think it won't allow it because of the GPS. No, only available with the vehicle stopped. So let's go to sport mode. It already gets us excited. We're here. Look, I'll show you. Rodrigo Mora in the M3. We can film a little bit here. Yeah, you already get that cluster. All about business, right? The ZF 8-speed here, which are almost mandatory in German sports cars from Mercedes and BMW these days. You can see that someone set it up, right? The suspension is in comfort mode. You can make all the adjustments, right? So throttle response is in Sport Plus, the suspension is in comfort, the steering is in Sport, and the brakes are also in Sport. And then when you ask for just a little bit of pops and bangs, it also accepts downshifts. We're talking about 480 horsepower and 61 kilogram force meters of torque. That's a lot of torque, right? And the exhaust note, yes, the purist internet crowd has its reservations because part of the sound is artificially piped into the cabin. But honestly, in the real world, not only is that not going to be noticed, look at Mora showing off. It's tamed. It's pretty tamed too. By pump, I like the puff of the upshifts, right? Every time you lift off, and the downshifts give it that little track ready edge, right? We're getting the chance here to drive the M2 on the highway, as the Argentinians would say, and not in the mountains like we got to do with the M4. Yeah, and it's exactly in the mountains where that advantage shows, right? That difference between the M2 and the M4 stands out more. It's more noticeable, right? I like it. I'll tell you guys, since we're doing some highway driving here. By the way, this carbon paddle makes you want to take the whole steering wheel off and hang it on the wall, right? It's a really cool, very sporty presentation. Very high-end, man, to use the trendy term. Yeah, but on this big road here, look, let's dodge the plastic bag, see how quick the steering is. It's impressive. We need to be honest about the M2's seat, right? It's much more comfortable than those competition seats that the M3 up there and the M4 have, right? They're very beautiful seats, but at least the ones in the M3 and M4 competition, right? I think it's even an option in the M2, right? In the M2 CS for sure, this type of seat. Yeah, it's beautiful, right? That carbon shell and everything, but the lower back of a 44-year-old man doesn't appreciate it. More than an hour there, it starts to scream at me, even though it has lumbar adjustment, but it really, yeah, I don't know, it doesn't fit my behind here. And you lose things, right? I was throwing the water bottle earlier. No, here we also don't have the pocket. Yeah, even though it's not carbon, yeah, there's no little pocket here behind the passenger seat. Yeah, in short, I think the M2, what it delivers is more sportiness, more liveliness. And above all, this feeling of lightness compared to the M4, especially considering how much less it costs and how much it really gives you, right? Rear seat space, trunk. You're not really giving up that much in terms of everyday usability, because I think that's the big... thing, the appeal of these BMW coupes, right? Compared to what would be the quintessential German daily sports coupe, which is the Cayman or Boxster, right? As a Boxster guy myself. Yeah, since I have, anyway, I'm married, I have my wife's car, and I also have my Raptor. I don't need a car that's kind of a Swiss Army knife, right? I can afford to treat myself, and having any of these cars in Brazil is treating yourself, right? But talking about the car's setup itself, I can afford to have a sports car that's really a true 100% pure sports car, right? A car with only 2 seats, it's a convertible car. Now, if you live a life where you're an enthusiast and want a single car, I think BMW's coupes they reign alone in the Brazilian market, with the only real competitor being the Mustang, right? You want a truly sporty car, a purebred, high-performance car that you can use as a daily driver, that lets you take a passenger, that has a trunk for a weekend trip for you to go to the supermarket and so on, etc., etc. There are only these 3 options in the Brazilian market, really. I think the 911 is already a bit too hardcore, and the backseat of the 911 isn't really usable, right? Yeah, the Mustang's backseat actually is usable for adults on short trips, and the BMW's even more so. So what do the BMWs offer? That extra usability of the backseat. Yeah, but if you really care about that European sporty temperament, right? It's a tighter, more compact car with quick reflexes. That's where BMWs stand out from the Mustang. Then you get to the M2 versus M4 comparison. Man, I think what the M4 gives you in terms of practicality isn't enough to make up for what the M2 gives you in liveliness and a lower price. Aesthetically, well, it's that old story, right? Taste is like a butt. Everyone has their own and thinks the other smells bad. But it's weird, isn't it? I think the M2, like I said before, is the car that has grown on me the most aesthetically ever. This generation of the 2 Series, right? I think BMW made a mistake by introducing this G87 generation with the purple M240. Remember those promotional photos? It looked way too boxy. The M2, right, with the wider fenders, it looks much rounder now. And time, right? Time is the master of everything. Time heals everything. We got used to it. And actually, since the crisp angle era, right, BMW is notorious for introducing cars with very striking shapes that shock people at first, but later, in their own time, people get used to them. And much later, 10 years down the line, these are cars that age very well because in a way, they were ahead of their time, right? The biggest example of this for me is the first Z4 by Chris Bangle. That's a car that's over 15 years old. And if you tell your grandmother it's a 2026 car, she'll believe it. With all due respect to your grandmother. Anyone who doesn't know much about cars, right? It's a car that still has a contemporary look today because it was way ahead of its time. It was a car that was heavily criticized back then. Some of Chris Bangle's cars didn't age well either. The 7 Series is still ugly today. But the M2 is aging really well. Anyway, to sum up, final thoughts, candidate. Yeah, I think the M2 for me delivers more. And it's a very attractive purchase, right? Because it's, by Brazilian standards, almost a supercar, which, however, allows you to do things here. Little trips, weekend getaways, Campos to Jordão, supermarket, baby seat in the back seat, going out with your wife, right? A Boxster won't fit me, Roberta and Noah, right? But in the M2 I could. And then, yeah, in a direct comparison within the family, M2 and M4, get out of the left lane, man. Why do people drive slow in the left lane? Why? What changes in this guy's life if he drives slow in the right lane? I really can't understand. Yeah, anyway, parenthesis aside, in a direct comparison, M2 versus M4, I'm team M2, and I'll tell you more. I like this São Paulo yellow. I think that sports car with a flashy color, it's awesome. There you go, coming from the owner of a Raptor. There. Do you agree or disagree? Tell us which camp you're in. M2 or M4, leave a like on this video. Subscribe to the channel. That always helps us a lot. And let me give it one last stretch. That's power. More than enough.